My name is Michelle Jackson, and my story began on Christmas Eve, 1994. I had started drinking and doing drugs when I was 15. By 19, I was an everyday abuser. My parents had tried to help me numerous times, but I always ended up taking advantage of them and going back. It was suggested to both my parents to walk away from me. This was very hard for them, but they did. My mother began praying for me every day and including me in every prayer request she could at church. She had everyone who would listen praying for me. I was now 25, and I was at rock bottom. I was violently addicted. I was being evicted. I was scared. I was alone. I was broke. I had no hope, and I was pregnant. Every day I tried to quit, and every day I failed. I hated myself. I could no longer look at myself in the mirror. That Christmas Eve, I decided that suicide was my only option. I thought the easiest way would be to overdose, so that's what I tried to do. By that evening, I had made myself sick, but I didn't overdose. I sat in a corner of a dark room, crying uncontrollably. I had no idea what I was going to do. The next thing that happened is very hard for me to put into words. The room that was cold and dark seemed warm and light, and I heard the words, "Everything is going to be okay." I didn't know how, but for reasons I can't explain, I believed it. About an hour later, 2 men knocked on my door. I knew them from work, and they had told me some time before that they were recovering alcoholics, and when I was ready to get sober to call them. That night, my mother had called them because she hadn't been able to reach me. She lived a few hours away, so she had found these 2 men at home and asked them to find me. When I answered the door, they told me to get in the car. They called my mom on a cell phone, and she told me to do what they said. One of them took me to his home. His wife fed me and cleaned me up and put me to bed. The next morning, I was included in all of their Christmas meals. No one asked me why I was there. They just made me feel welcome. I was in a house full of strangers, but it was the best Christmas I had had in a long time. I moved in with my sister, and I kept putting one foot in front of the other, and every day somehow my needs were met. A few months later, I gave birth to my daughter. She was perfect, healthy, over 8 pounds. It was amazing. I knew at that moment that God had done this for me. It was God that had spoken to me that night. That day I got on my knees and I thanked God for sparing me and for making my daughter healthy, and I asked him if he would take away my addictions forever. You see, I was afraid they would come back. Since that day, I have not had one craving or urge to use drugs or drink. For the next 9 years, sobriety totally changed my life. I continue to be grateful to God for my sobriety, but unfortunately that was the only part of my life I would let him have. I married and had a son, but that marriage failed. All along, God continued to pour his blessings on me and my family. Over the next few months, everything started to change. My husband and I started to serve, and my relationship with God began to change. On Christmas Eve of that year, I was talking to God like I always do. I quietly celebrate my sobriety every year by thanking God for it. But this Christmas was different. In the past, I'd always thanked him for getting me sober that night, for my children, my husband, etc. But now I had come to realize over those months that my sobriety, my children, my husband were not the greatest gift that God had given me. His greatest gift to me was his son. Jesus died for me so that I could be forgiven, really, really forgiven for all of those things that I had done. I know now that he didn't just get me sober for the sake of my children. God knows everything I have ever done, and he loves me anyway. My story is a story of forgiveness. I no longer feel ashamed, and I no longer feel like something is missing in my life.